Hello and welcome to the PropTech Hot Seat on iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Tallon, the show where we explore trends and technologies driving innovation across the built environment. Brought to you in partnership with PropTech Ireland, the hub for innovators, investors and indeed industry leaders. In the PropTech Hot Seat today, we have Bonnie Murray, founder of Record. Record is a tool created for real estate investment and asset management professionals that distills complicated Excel models and integrates disparate data sources into one location, allowing for real-time portfolio analysis at your fingertips. That's a tall order. Bonnie, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me this morning, Carol. I really appreciate it.
I am delighted, and I was so excited to chat to you about this. So tell me, from your own background, how did you come to set up Record?
That's a great question. Carol, I spent 15 years in the public markets. I started my career at a tech-focused hedge fund. I was an equity trader during the global financial crisis, which, as you can imagine, I have many war wounds I could share from that experience. I worked at a private investment bank, bringing our product over to Europe. And really what I leveraged from that experience was the availability and transparency of data through Bloomberg every day. And I just assumed the rest of the investment world operated at that level of efficiency. After having my second son, I pivoted and recognized I needed some more homework balance and started working for a private equity firm where we bought multifamily assets from Boston down to Northern Virginia. What was quickly apparent after moving into commercial real estate was this lack of technological adoption and interoperability across systems. So I spent the next 5 years at that firm. And, fast forward during COVID, I'm home teaching my two children, watching my husband work off of his Bloomberg as if nothing had ever happened. And here I was, relegated to the corner on my iPad, and it took me 3 Excel models, 2 PDFs, and a call into my analyst to extract 5 KPIs that I needed for an investor call. And it was really in that moment that I thought to myself, how is it the world's largest asset class doesn't have access to their data? So I left my firm in 2021 to start Record. Record means connection in French. And at that time, I took a high-level overview that the world was never going back to an office 5 days a week. Teams were forever going to be geographically dispersed. And thus, I wanted to build a technology that really broke down the barriers of in and out of the office. So we built a mobile-first technology, and we went mobile-first because the reality is, every interaction we have is mediated through a smartphone, and every service provided is done through software. So we're a mobile-first technology that distills, as you mentioned, complex Excel models and collates disparate data sources from internal business intelligence at these large organizations, and pulls it into their phone to really help them understand the story that their data is telling them.
Have we improved? So I absolutely take your perspective here, coming from kind of the financial services. Then you could see that real estate was not doing this well. But I suppose anybody who's been in the industry for a decade or longer will say, well, actually, we're doing an awful lot better than we were doing it a decade ago. But are you seeing an improvement? And if so, what's driving that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that just naturally, the introduction of more and more tools that exist to help kind of drive efficiency and workflows has been great. As you can imagine, AI has really pushed some productivity and automation through this industry. PropTech has really had an amazing decade, I guess, of progress, which has been great to see. But nonetheless, I would say that it's still an industry that's ripe for disruption. And so we're super excited to be a part of the PropTech community. And we're really excited to build solutions for our customers that really do drive efficiency and save critical time in their workflows.
Bonnie, the automation and predictability, they're really good words. We know there are things that the industry needs and wants, but we are in, I don't want to say unprecedentedly unpredictable times, but certainly across Europe, we are living through some lifetime unpredictability. So how do you account for that?
Yeah, I've always said that disruption is a catalyst for change. If you look at what came out of 08, 09, some of the most disruptive technologies of modern time were born during those times. It's Uber and Spotify and Square, and the list goes on. And so, I think this is actually a great moment in time where it forces people to kind of reset and take a look at things that aren't working, and introduce things that can really drive that type of efficiency and automation.
Not just across kind of the real estate and construction side, but particularly on the prop tech side, we're always looking at what the drivers are, what are the drivers of change. And, we talk about regulation, but they don't tend to, they tend to be the slowest of the drivers. And actually what we saw, in early 2020 was a necessity. COVID actually became a huge driver, but it normalized some of the actions that real estate operators should have been taking. They've been collecting data for years, but they were never doing anything. They weren't taking the insights. So in a way, the industry was being primed for a business like Raccord to come in, because actually, if you had done that 10 years earlier, there wasn't even the data for you to collect. So where are you in terms of gathering the sources that you can actually help turn those into insights? Is there enough data being collected?
There's absolutely enough data. It's the technologies that help, our customers really draw insights and inferences from those large amounts of unstructured data sets is really where the value is being driven. I mean, I think McKinsey put out a study that said, roughly 70 to 80%, of data that exists internally isn't being utilized. And frankly, that's why we built the tools we've built, is to help our customers truly understand the story that data is telling them, because they're not set up to actually leverage all of the raw data that exists internally at the moment. So our tool basically collates and brings together all of this business intelligence and then distills that down into only the essential metrics that are actually driving the decision-making on a day-to-day basis. So that, Raccord can structure that data so it can be understood.
In terms of the essential metrics, that in itself has changed. So in 2023, what do portfolio owners consider to be the essential metrics that are required for decision making?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. What I would say is the KPIs from one asset class to the next naturally can change, right? So for hospitality, they're really focused on RevPAR, occupancy, and ADR. Obviously, in the resi space, people are really solely focused on cash, and obviously NOI progression, yield on cost. So, I think one thing that makes us unique is that we've spent a considerable amount of time in the early days with beta testers across each of the asset classes to really understand what is driving their decision making on a day-to-day basis, so that we can in fact pull that data into the mobile application, and then obviously drawing insights from that data.
Previously we would have been, it doesn't surprise me, by the way, to hear that 70 to 80% of the data being collected was being used, because that absolutely tallies with what we've seen as people started to collect the data, because there was a growing awareness data was important. There just didn't seem to be the ability to turn that into insight. So, it's fantastic that that's being focused on now. But some of the other changes we're seeing in terms of cultural changes are around the tenant experience, whether it's for residential or commercial. It's around this sense of community, which previously has been considered quite intangible, but there are a number of metrics coming in now to ensure that the user experience of real estate is being focused on. And that wasn't the case a decade ago, but it's quite an intangible. So if you're looking at metrics in terms of, if we look at, say, across our sustainability metrics, they've become very defined. But across community, is there a business case? Is there a metric that you're applying for tenant satisfaction, whether it's commercial or residential? Are these metrics that are even figuring into the decision making of portfolio owners right now?
I think it's one data point that's important across, a plethora of data. We're really focused on the investment level information. So the property level data naturally feeds into these master models, and the master models are the source of truth that we're extracting these KPIs from. What I would say is with regards to, tenant satisfaction surveys, I think are really important. People are focused on. And so for us, so long as they sit within this master model, and you had also mentioned ESG metrics, and this is something we're really trying to push forward here in the US is, there's some great companies out there that are starting to collate this information naturally. This is a prescient issue that everyone needs to pay attention to, where 40% of CO2 emissions come from the built world. And so there's a lot of great companies that are solutioning around that. One thing I would say is we've been challenged to find those metrics living within the Excel model, living within the underwriting models that are driving the investment decision. So I'm really looking forward to the change that can be affected within the commercial real estate space. to push forward more kind of ESG and sustainability compliance.
If we break down ESG, would it be fair to say that the E is probably coming top on the essential metrics?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, listen, I think, the S and more so the G these days as well. I think everyone's really focused on this, really critical, matter at the moment. And as I mentioned, there's things like here in the US, we have LEED certification, there's GRESB scores, there's an amazing company called Measurable that's done a wonderful job at collating this information. So I think there's a lot of really, really smart people solutioning around that. And we're looking forward to working closely with them to bring that information into the app.
Well, then let's break that down into maybe where this factors into the investment decision. So, for example, in Ireland, we've seen that early industry leaders tend to, while there are a number of different certifications, GRESB is already emerging maybe as the leading standard. Similarly around LEED standard buildings, we can see that already these have gone from being kind of the premium, something that makes them best, to actually fundamental that a company won't choose a headquarters unless it is LEED certified. So, we're certainly moving from a place where these were the premium or best in class to really the standard that we need to be achieving. So in terms of the investment decisions, are we getting to the point where investment decisions are coming down to, okay, well, if a building is not of a certain standard or can't show that the building performance is X, we cannot allocate resources in that direction?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, these initiatives are not only being driven by the owner operators, but they're also being driven by the underlying capital base of these organizations, as you know, oftentimes are sourced from foundations and family offices and endowments. And I think naturally, that capital base is forcing through these types of changes. And I think it's really exciting to see this transition happening within the commercial real estate space.
Bonnie, who are your typical clients? At what stage of the transaction are you coming in? Who are you advising?
Yeah, so really, the investment management and the asset management teams internally at these owner operators. And, our application is really applicable for small organizations that are looking to do more with less, all the way up to the large global organizations that are really looking for organization within their large amounts of unstructured data.
Okay, and just in terms of the role of technology, is technology as fundamental for unlocking the data? Because I know it's the mechanism, but again, as we've mentioned there, it's not necessarily the driver, it's just enabling the driver. But how do you see that changing then in the future? Obviously with Record, what you're doing is hugely ambitious, and it's absolutely the right time in the marketplace. And again, 10 years previously, you wouldn't have had the data to be able to pull those insights. So it feels very timely. But where do you go to next? What's kind of the long-term objective, and what's the role of technology in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is really what everyone will be focused on, right? And the value of AI is, it identifies nonlinear patterns in large amounts of data. That's just not available for a typical human being to do on their own. I think allowing AI to drive a more comprehensive analysis across portfolios, I think will be a huge value proposition going forward.
Where's the customer base kind of geographically? Are you operating in North America only, or have you touched into the European market yet?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So at the moment, we're really solely focused on penetration within the US. But naturally, as we start to strategically grow our customer base, and the larger enterprise clients naturally own assets globally. So we do intend to expand across Canada and Europe in short order.
Yeah, and actually that's really why I was asking the question, because we're seeing real estate is something that has always had geographic borders, but money doesn't. Capital doesn't, and we've really experienced that over the past kind of decade and a half. What we've seen, for example, with PropTech startups in Ireland. Ireland's a very small country, so actually one of the differences I think with the startup in Ireland as opposed to other countries is that they are primed for export from day one. Because there is never a market, or there usually isn't a market big enough on the island of Ireland. So you're priming for export straight away. And actually, one of the routes to export that is proven most successful is when you go with a client. So, for example, in developers in Ireland, while Ireland is a small country, we have some world-class developers, ones that are recognized as being leaders, not just in the UK and across Europe, but actually in some cases in North America, but also across some of the Asian markets. So is that a strategy that you might use when you're looking at expanding outside of the US? Will you be able to do that? Because I assume you're dealing with clients today who have assets internationally.
Absolutely. And, I think that will be the biggest driving force for our expansion globally. We're about to start a pilot with a very large global owner operator. And naturally, we want to be able to service their entire team. And so we've built into our code, obviously, units and metrics that that are applicable for European assets. And so I do think this will be very customer driven. But as you can imagine, as you're growing, a small technology company, it is important to stay strategic and nimble in the early days so that you can, in fact, make sure that your technology is driving value for your customers, and that everything that you're building actually does what you say you're going to do before, in fact, you start to expand globally.
That's a really interesting point, and it's one maybe that startups tend to gloss over because they have to. There's an element of smoke and mirrors that you have to move forward and trust in your technology and trust in your team. So it is a little bit like building the rail tracks as the train is moving. And that's part of being in a startup, and you mentioned it there in terms of being nimble and strategic. And sometimes they can be two competing objectives. So to be strategic, you can lose a bit of the nimbleness that gives the startup its strength. So may I ask, what are the plans for Raccord over the next 12 months? Can you share a little of what's in your pipeline and some of your ambitions?
Yeah, well, one thing I would mention just to one of your earlier points is, I think we're seeing the disadvantages to growth at all costs, right? That's playing out in the marketplace today. So I do think part of, being successful in the long term and building a long-term sustainable organization is just making sure that you are, in fact, strategic in your growth. One thing we've focused on significantly is, our data sync mechanism, which is very unique to Raccord, which allows us to sync and process our customers' data to the cloud and push it back into their mobile application. And that process naturally is applicable globally. So that's something that we've stayed focused on. And so we're really excited. I think for us, it's, staying close to our customers and making sure that we are customer obsessed is something that's really important to us. And so as we've kind of collated customer feedback and started to incorporate that into development, I think that's really helped us drive business value for our current and prospective investors. And we're in the process now of developing our web application, because as you can imagine, we're fairly limited with the surface area on the mobile. And so what we've done is we've taken, the features and functionality that exist in the mobile application, put that onto a desktop, and then created some really interesting functionality that also is very unique to Raccord. And so, within the next 12 months, we intend to expand our team and also make sure that, we're delivering that web application. And of course, we continue to expand our customer base as well.
For certainly we know that we're in interesting times looking at the data. So I would imagine that many of your early customers are probably already leaders in this space. But say for others who, maybe it resonates with them that actually they are collecting a lot of data that they're sitting on and they don't know how to action. What are some immediate steps or what's some initial advice that you could give them to get started?
They can give us a call. We'd be happy to guide them through that kind of, we've always said that commercial real estate is being pushed through technological disruption. And so we're more than happy to provide guidance in the early days as people start to think thoroughly through kind of their data strategies internally. You're
right. They're being pushed. How can we turn that into a pull? How can we make that more compelling?
Yeah, I think I think that we, like everything, we need more time and more education on the critical role that data plays in driving business value.
Very good. Okay, that's a great starting point for anybody who does want to reach out to yourself and to the Raccord team. Thank you so much for joining us today. That's all we've time for. That was Bonnie Murray, founder of Record. My thanks to show producer Katie Talon, and to the production team at Hear Me Roar Media. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out all of the other real estate and construction shows on iPropertyRadio. Before we go, just a special word of thanks to our sponsor, PropTech Ireland, the hub for innovators, investors and industry leaders in Ireland. Thank you for making this podcast and these conversations possible. And thank you indeed for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next episode of the PropTech Hot Seat here on iPropertyRadio. Thank you for listening.